It was a regular Thursday morning in Ridgewood, a small, bustling town where life moved at a steady pace. The courthouse stood as a stately symbol of justice, its brick facade reflecting the quiet authority of the law. Inside, the usual hum of activity filled the air. Lawyers reviewed documents in the hallways, defendants sat nervously in waiting rooms, and witnesses discussed the day's proceedings. But today, there was an unusual energy in the air. It wasn't the usual routine. It was something more electric, something that felt like the calm before a storm. Elijah Carter, 18 years old, stepped through the heavy courthouse doors. The sound of his worn shoes echoed on the polished floor as he walked into the courtroom. His movements were deliberate, but his heart raced, each step more daunting than the last. At first glance, no one would have given him a second look. He was just another teenager in a too-large suit, with a case file clutched tightly in his hands. He looked nervous, almost out of place. His shoes, scuffed from too many miles walked on hard pavement, creaked with every step he took. But those who underestimated him would soon regret it. The gallery, filled with seasoned lawyers, law enforcement officers, and the usual courtroom crowd, took notice of him as he made his way to the defendant's table. Eyes followed him, whispers ran through the room, and people exchanged skeptical glances. It wasn't just his age that caught their attention, it was his whole demeanor. His suit, clearly borrowed from an older relative, hung awkwardly on his slim frame. The sleeves were too long, and the pants bunched up at his ankles. His hair, neatly combed, did little to hide the tension in his face. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted the papers in his grip, and a faint sweat began to bead on his forehead. He was nervous, sure, but it wasn't fear that caused the tremor. It was the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't just another case. It wasn't some frivolous traffic violation or petty dispute. Elijah was here to defend himself, not just as a teenager, but as a young man with the legal knowledge and experience to stand toe-to-toe with anyone in the courtroom. He wasn't here to impress anyone with his appearance, and he certainly wasn't here to play by the typical rules. He was here to prove a point, not only to the court, but to everyone who had doubted him, dismissed him, or underestimated him. His presence alone was a statement. As Elijah took his seat, the murmurs in the gallery grew louder. A few older members of the crowd exchanged knowing looks. Some stifled quiet chuckles, shaking their heads at the young man who had walked in like a fish out of water. Others whispered to one another, speculating how quickly this case would wrap up. They all had the same assumption. This was just another unprepared, naive teenager who would waste the court's time, and in a matter of minutes, they'd be back to their usual cases. Little did they know, they were in for a surprise. Behind the bench sat Judge Linda Harris, a figure known for her unyielding authority and swift judgments. She glanced over the room before locking eyes with Elijah. Her gaze was stern, almost critical. To her, this case was just another in a long line of trivial matters. A minor traffic infraction, probably a dispute over a speeding ticket. Nothing special, nothing worth a second thought. But as she watched Elijah sit there, quietly adjusting his case file, something inside her stirred. It was an unfamiliar sensation, an inkling of curiosity mixed with a small, nagging doubt. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to witness something unexpected. The courtroom fell into an uneasy quiet as the judge began to call the case. No one could have predicted the turn of events that were about to unfold. Elijah, standing there in his oversized suit, wasn't just there to defend a speeding ticket. He was about to rewrite the narrative. He was about to show that sometimes, the most underestimated people are the ones who are the most dangerous. Dangerous not with force or anger, but with knowledge, confidence, and a determination that no one saw coming. And in that moment, as the whispers quieted down and the judge's gavel struck, it became clear that this was not just another day at Ridgewood's courthouse. It was the start of something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. Elijah Carter was about to change the course of his life and the lives of everyone in that courtroom, forever. Elijah took a deep breath, the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The courtroom felt heavy, the silence almost suffocating. He was standing in front of a judge with decades of experience, a judge who had seen it all. Judge Linda Harris was known for her no-nonsense approach, and Elijah knew this wasn't going to be easy. But he wasn't intimidated. He had prepared for this moment his entire life, and he wasn't about to back down now. With a slow, deliberate movement, he straightened his back and stepped forward. The case before him was a minor traffic dispute, nothing that should have warranted such attention, but Elijah was determined to make it count. He wasn't just there to defend a speeding ticket. He was there to make a statement, to show that people like him, often overlooked and underestimated, deserve to be heard. As he began to speak, his voice trembled slightly at first, but the more he spoke, the steadier he became. He recounted the details of the incident with precision, his words carefully chosen to ensure every detail was clear. He explained how the officer had pulled him over for speeding, but with the facts he presented, it became evident that the officer's measurements were flawed. Elijah wasn't just reciting the facts. He was laying out an argument, one that he had rehearsed over and over in his mind. The gallery, which had been filled with dismissive glances and quiet laughter earlier, fell silent. The weight of Elijah's words seemed to stop time. His argument wasn't what people expected from a teenager. It wasn't just a series of excuses or half-baked defenses. No, Elijah was citing legal precedents, statutes, and even referencing specifics of the road conditions at the time of the ticket. He knew what he was talking about, and it was impossible to ignore. Judge Harris, who had initially been so quick to dismiss him, now found herself leaning forward in her chair, her stern face softening just slightly as she took note of the young man standing before her. Elijah didn't just appear prepared, he was prepared. This wasn't some naive teenager who had stumbled into court unprepared. This was someone who had put in the work, who had studied the law, who knew how to use the tools at his disposal to present a solid case. Despite her years of experience, Judge Harris was beginning to feel the first stirrings of doubt. She had assumed Elijah would falter, that the case would be over before it had even begun. But as he continued speaking, the certainty that had once filled the courtroom began to slip away. Her eyes narrowed as she listened more intently, her thoughts shifting from skepticism to curiosity. She was starting to wonder who this young man really was. "Mr. Carter," Judge Harris finally interjected, her voice slightly softer than before, but still commanding. "You seem to know the law quite well. Where did you learn all of this?" Elijah paused, and for a brief moment, the weight of the question hung in the air. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the truth would finally come out. With quiet confidence, he answered, "Your Honor, I've been studying law since I was 12. I passed the bar exam at 17. The room fell silent. Even the opposing counsel, a seasoned attorney who had been dismissing Elijah at every turn, stopped in his tracks. A few gasps echoed through the gallery. Elijah Carter, this young man standing before them, wasn't just any defendant. He wasn't some kid who had wandered into the courtroom by mistake. He was a licensed attorney, a prodigy who had passed the bar exam years before most people his age even considered their career paths. Judge Harris, who had assumed this case would be a quick and easy one, now found herself rethinking everything she had believed. She looked at Elijah, her eyes searching for any sign of doubt, but there was none. He was not only confident, but he was right. Every word he spoke was backed by evidence, by logic, and by the law. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms and studying him carefully. This was no longer just about a speeding ticket. This was about something much bigger. Elijah Carter had just opened her eyes to the potential of a young mind that had been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated by so many before him. The court had become his stage, and Elijah was showing everyone in that room exactly what he was capable of. It wasn't about the case anymore. It was about breaking barriers, about challenging assumptions and proving that, no matter how old or young you are, You deserve a seat at the table. Elijah's words grew more confident with each passing sentence, as if the weight of the courtroom no longer bore down on him. His voice, once shaky, now had a calm strength to it, each statement layered with precision and purpose. He began recounting every detail of the incident that had brought him to court: the time, the place, the officer's position, and the specific conditions of the road. He even referenced the exact location of road signs and speed limits, pulling the audience into the story, making them see the events through his eyes. Every fact he presented was carefully chosen, every moment highlighted with evidence that was irrefutable. It was clear that this wasn't just a case of a young man attempting to get out of a ticket. Elijah was presenting a well-crafted defense that reflected hours, if not years, of study. He wasn't just recounting the facts. He was building an airtight argument, one brick at a time. He pointed to the radar gun's method of speed measurement, explaining the discrepancies in the officer's timing and how it failed to meet legal standards. He quoted specific sections of the traffic code with such authority that even the most experienced lawyer in the room began to doubt his own arguments. As Elijah spoke, the gallery grew quieter. The skeptical chuckles from moments earlier had faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Judge Harris, who had initially been poised to dismiss the case, began to pay closer attention. Her pen, which had been tapping against her notepad in a rhythmic, impatient pattern, was now still. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Elijah as she tried to absorb the depth of his argument. It was clear she was no longer simply a judge in a courtroom. She was an observer of something unexpected, something that demanded her respect. The opposing counsel, a seasoned attorney with decades of courtroom experience, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been dismissive of Elijah from the start, assuming that the young man would be unprepared and easy to defeat. But now he was caught off guard. His eyes flickered toward the judge, and then back at Elijah, as if searching for a sign that this was some sort of fluke. It wasn't. Elijah's arguments were well supported, and his understanding of the law was more profound than the attorney had anticipated. The seasoned lawyer tried to maintain his composure, but he couldn't ignore the doubt creeping into his mind. This wasn't just a teenager rambling about a ticket. This was a young man with a command of the law, methodically breaking down his case with all the precision and confidence of a seasoned professional. The lawyer's attempt to find a flaw in Elijah's defense became more and more futile. Elijah wasn't just presenting a defense. He was presenting a challenge to everything the lawyer had assumed about him. As Elijah finished laying out the final points of his argument, the courtroom held its breath. There were no interruptions, no objections. The opposing counsel, once so certain of his victory, was now speechless, his face betraying the dawning realization that he had underestimated this young man. Judge Harris, who had watched many attorneys over the years, now found herself questioning her initial assumptions. She had seen many cases, many defendants, but Elijah was different. She could see the meticulous preparation in his case, the careful attention to detail. She could see that this wasn't a mere teenager standing before her. It was someone who had earned his place in this courtroom, who had worked tirelessly to present a case that, though simple, was backed by a foundation of knowledge and understanding that few could rival. As the last of Elijah's points settled into the silence of the room, Judge Harris sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. But inside, she was thinking differently now. This wasn't a case to be brushed aside. This wasn't a young man to be dismissed as inexperienced or unworthy. Elijah had earned her attention, and perhaps, just perhaps, her respect. The case had only just begun, but the outcome was already in motion, one where Elijah was taking control of the narrative. The courtroom shifted, as if the very air had thickened with disbelief and intrigue. Elijah's argument wasn't just effective, it was mesmerizing. Every point he made was rooted in the law, meticulously researched, and backed by facts that left the gallery in stunned silence. The detailed map he had presented showed the precise location of the traffic stop, the officer's position, and the areas where the radar gun's readings would have been distorted. His ability to weave the elements of the case together, each argument building upon the last, was not that of a teenager fumbling through his first case. It was the work of someone who understood the intricacies of law deeply. Elijah's voice remained steady, his hands never trembling as he referenced case law, pointing to legal precedents that strengthened his position. The spectators in the gallery, who had once dismissed him, now exchanged glances of disbelief. They had come to the courthouse expecting to witness a routine, perhaps mundane, hearing, but instead, they were watching an unfolding mastery of legal argument that even seasoned lawyers struggled to rival. Judge Harris, known for her sharp focus and no-nonsense approach, sat at her bench, her initial skepticism fading as she observed the young defendant. The pens that once clicked rhythmically against her notepad now lay still, forgotten. She leaned forward in her seat, her brow furrowed as she studied Elijah, her expression unreadable. The room grew quieter, the tension palpable, as if every person in the courtroom realized that something extraordinary was happening before their eyes. "Mr. Carter," Judge Harris finally spoke, her tone softer now, a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Where exactly did you learn to present a case like this?" For a brief moment, Elijah paused. He had been waiting for this question, knowing that the revelation would change everything. His heart raced, but his voice remained calm, unwavering, as he met Judge Harris's gaze. "Your Honor, I've been studying law since I was 12. I passed the bar exam when I was 17. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a stunned silence. The audience, once dismissive and amused by the thought of a teenager standing before them in a courtroom, now looked at him with astonishment. The weight of his words hung in the air as people tried to process the fact that the young man before them wasn't just some naive defendant. He was a licensed attorney, an accomplished one at that. The opposing counsel, a veteran lawyer with decades of experience, was visibly stunned. He sat back in his chair, his face momentarily losing its practiced composure. His shoulders slumped as he realized he had been thoroughly outclassed, not by a fellow lawyer, but by a young man who, by all accounts, should have been too young to even consider practicing law, let alone argue a case with such authority. Elijah had completely turned the tables. The seasoned attorney, who had walked into the courtroom confident of a quick victory, now found himself struggling to keep up with a defendant who was dismantling his every argument with clarity and precision. Elijah didn't seem to notice the shock of those around him. His focus remained on the case, on the truth he was fighting for. As the tension in the room mounted, he continued his argument, citing more statutes and case law with ease. The gallery, which had once viewed him with amusement, now watched with respect, their earlier judgment replaced by awe. Judge Harris, still processing Elijah's revelation, leaned back in her chair, her expression now one of genuine respect. She had entered the courtroom expecting a simple case, one she could dismiss quickly and move on from. But what she was witnessing was something far more profound. A young man, so determined and prepared, that he had not only defended himself, but had commanded the courtroom in a way few had ever done. Her thoughts began to shift. This wasn't just about a speeding ticket. This was a young man demonstrating not just his legal knowledge, but his character, his resilience, and his ability to rise above the assumptions people had about him. The tension in the room was palpable as the opposing counsel gathered himself, knowing his position had weakened. He had underestimated Elijah from the start, and now it was clear that his assumptions had been wrong. Elijah wasn't some naive teenager playing at law. He was a fully capable attorney with a mind honed to navigate the intricacies of the legal system. And, as the case progressed, it became clear that Judge Harris wasn't the only one who had underestimated him. Everyone in the courtroom had made the same mistake. What started as a simple traffic dispute had turned into a dramatic display of talent and intelligence. The courtroom, which had initially been filled with laughter and doubt, now hung on Elijah's every word. It was no longer just about the case at hand. It was about challenging perceptions, breaking barriers, and proving that brilliance could come from the most unexpected places. The atmosphere in the courtroom began to shift. What had started as skepticism and quiet amusement was now replaced with hushed admiration. The spectators who had once chuckled at Elijah's appearance now leaned forward in their seats, captivated by his every word. There was a sense of disbelief in the air as they watched this young man dismantle every argument with ease and precision. He wasn't just speaking about the law, he was living it. His knowledge of legal processes, coupled with his calm demeanor, made it clear that Elijah was not the naive teenager they had assumed. Even Judge Harris, who had initially been quick to dismiss Elijah, was forced to reassess her opinion. Her sharp, no-nonsense persona had softened slightly, and for the first time, she gave the young man her full attention. Elijah wasn't the unprepared kid she'd assumed him to be. He wasn't just a teenager in a suit. He was a young man who had spent years studying and understanding the law, someone who had worked tirelessly to become proficient in a field that many older, more experienced lawyers would find daunting. It was evident that Elijah's expertise was born of passion and dedication, not just books and theory, and that was something Judge Harris couldn't ignore. As Elijah continued to present his case, his arguments became even more compelling. He cross-examined the police officer's report with surgical precision, pointing out the inconsistencies and flaws in the evidence that had been presented. With every question, every piece of evidence, Elijah's confidence grew, and his case gained strength. The courtroom, once filled with murmurs of doubt, now sat in complete silence, hanging on his every word. In his closing remarks, Elijah delivered a powerful message. He urged the court to focus on the facts, to judge not by his age, appearance, or assumptions about him, but by the merits of the case. His voice, steady and commanding, left no room for doubt. The arguments he had made were sound, his analysis unassailable. Elijah Carter had proven that, no matter his age, he was not to be underestimated. And as he finished speaking, it was clear to everyone in the room. The case had already been won. As the case reached its climax, Elijah stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest. He had laid out every piece of evidence, dismantled the opposing arguments, and delivered his final statement with unwavering confidence. Now, it was time to make his request. With measured calm, he motioned for the charges to be dismissed, citing the lack of credible evidence and the glaring flaws in the police report. He had built a solid foundation for his argument, and now it was in the hands of Judge Harris. Judge Harris, who had watched the entire proceedings unfold with increasing admiration, leaned forward slightly. She reviewed the facts once more, her eyes scanning the evidence laid out before her. For a long moment, the courtroom was suspended in silence. The tension in the air was thick as the judge deliberated. Elijah's case was airtight, his arguments compelling, and she knew that her decision would carry weight not just for the outcome of this case, but as a reflection of the young man standing before her. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Judge Harris spoke, her voice calm, yet filled with an unexpected respect. "Mr. Carter," she began, her eyes meeting his, "this motion is well prepared, far beyond what I would expect from someone in their first year of practice. I hereby grant your motion to dismiss the charges." A wave of silence swept over the room, the weight of her words sinking in. Then, like a ripple spreading through water, the applause began. It started as a hesitant clapping, unsure of whether it was allowed, but soon grew into a resounding acknowledgement of Elijah's remarkable achievement. Spectators rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes, others simply in awe of the young man who had just proven so much more than anyone had expected. Elijah, however, remained composed. The applause, though deserved, wasn't what mattered to him. His victory wasn't about the recognition or the praise. It was about proving a point. He had entered that courtroom to fight for justice, to show that talent and intelligence weren't defined by age or appearance. And now, standing in front of a room full of people who had once doubted him, Elijah knew he had achieved something far greater than just winning a case. He had changed the way they saw him, and maybe, just maybe, the way they saw others like him. Elijah's victory quickly became the talk of the town, then the country. News outlets were abuzz with the story of the 18-year-old attorney who had successfully defended himself in a courtroom, outsmarting seasoned professionals and proving that age and appearance didn't determine one's capability. His name began trending across social media platforms, sparking widespread discussion about talent, intelligence, and breaking societal barriers. Interviews with journalists flooded in, each one eager to understand how a young man could have accomplished such a remarkable feat. How had Elijah managed to master the law so early? What motivated him to pursue such an ambitious goal? As the media frenzy grew, law schools, prestigious firms, and advocacy groups reached out to Elijah, eager to offer him opportunities to further his career. The world seemed to open up before him, filled with possibilities and doors waiting to be unlocked. The attention, praise, and invitations were a testament to his brilliance and to the story of a young man who had defied the odds. However, despite the whirlwind of accolades, Elijah remained grounded. He wasn't interested in basking in the spotlight. His focus had always been about something much more important: fighting for fairness and justice. Elijah knew the attention was a platform, not a prize. He chose to use this newfound recognition to raise awareness about the biases that so many young people, especially those from underprivileged backgrounds, faced when trying to carve a place for themselves in a world that often judged them based on their appearance or age. He spoke passionately about the assumptions people often make, urging others to challenge the stereotypes that often held them back. He used his voice to encourage those who were doubted to believe in their abilities, to push past the barriers of judgment, and to keep fighting for what they deserved. For Elijah, the victory wasn't just about the courtroom. It was about the larger fight for equality, opportunity, and recognition for all those who had been overlooked or underestimated. Elijah's story quickly became a symbol of resilience, not only for aspiring lawyers, but for anyone who had ever been held back by society's expectations. Instead of letting the accolades define him, he let them fuel his determination to make a bigger difference in the world. His journey was just beginning, and he intended to use every moment of his newfound platform to inspire others and make real change. Elijah's journey didn't end with a single courtroom victory. His story became a beacon of hope for many, inspiring people to believe in themselves, regardless of the obstacles they faced. He used his experience to motivate others, especially young people who felt overlooked or unheard. Elijah became a mentor, using his platform to show that talent, intelligence, and determination can emerge from the most unlikely of places. His message resonated far beyond the courtroom. As his influence grew, Elijah's words began to reach more than just aspiring lawyers. He spoke to anyone who had ever been underestimated or doubted. He told his story in interviews, on social media, and at public speaking events, always reflecting on his journey and the lessons he had learned along the way. "I didn't walk into that courtroom to prove anyone wrong," Elijah often said. "I walked in to prove myself right." It was a message of self-belief, resilience, and courage, a reminder that the biggest battles aren't always against others, but against the doubts we carry within ourselves. He continued, "The truth is, we all face moments when people doubt us. But those moments aren't walls, they're doors waiting to be opened." Elijah's words were powerful because they came from a place of experience. He had faced his own doubts, his own challenges, and yet, he had used them to propel himself forward rather than let them hold him back. He had turned every obstacle into an opportunity, and now he was helping others do the same. Elijah's story teaches us a powerful lesson. Never judge someone based on their appearance or age. True talent and potential are not confined by society's expectations or the limitations others place on us. Success is about resilience, self-belief, and the courage to challenge preconceived notions. Elijah's victory was not just a win in the courtroom. It was a triumph over stereotypes, a reminder that success is not reserved for the chosen few, but for anyone who dares to dream and is willing to put in the hard work to make those dreams a reality. It's a call to all of us to look beyond the surface, to embrace our own potential, and to never let others define who we are or what we can achieve.